My parents gave my sister a luxury resort trip for Christmas. Mom smiled. You are the pride of our family. I opened my gift day paper labeled household chore list. Dad laughed. Now you can be more useful. My sister clapped. I packed my bags and left. Days later, my parents called in a panic. Where are you? Come back. My parents surprised my sister with a luxurious resort getaway for Christmas. Mom beamed. You're the pride of our family. While I unwrapped my gift only to find a paper titled Household Chore List. Dad chuckled. Now you can be even more helpful, and my sister cheered. I packed my bags and left. Days later, my parents called in a panic. Where are you? Come back. Margaret Watson watched winter sunlight stream through the window as she reread a message from her mom on her phone. I have a special surprise for you. Look forward to it. A small smile touched her face. At the accounting firm in Willow Creek, Pennsylvania, Margaret's days were all about numbers and routine. Her skill at analyzing clients' finances and offering spot-on advice earned her the nickname Maggie among her colleagues, who always turned to her when problems arose. Ever since elementary school, when she never missed a homework deadline and served as class representative, she had been known as the reliable, responsible one. At home, as the eldest daughter, she was expected to manage everything when her parents were away. In stark contrast stood her sister Lisa, a thriving fashion designer in New York City. Lisa was Margaret's complete opposite. Vibrant, sociable, and unafraid to shine. Ever since school, Lisa had caught everyone's eye with her unique style, and now her creative talent had even led her to launch her own brand. Maggie, look, my design just appeared in Vogue. Lisa had texted last month, showing a magazine spread featuring a model in her colorful dress. While Margaret sent heartfelt congratulations, a twinge of loneliness crept in. Comparing her own modest life with Lisa's glamorous one, Margaret felt the weight of family expectations. Their father, Walter, a retired construction executive, and their mother, Eleanor, a former high school teacher, always boasted about Lisa. At family gatherings, stories of Lisa's latest successes lit up the conversation, and their parents' eyes sparkled with pride when speaking of her. Lisa has such incredible talent, Eleanor would say, while Margaret was consistently labeled dependable. Behind that word, however, lay the unspoken demand that Margaret always handle the household chores and care for her parents. Margaret sighed deeply as she stared at the travel bag on the kitchen counter. During the Christmas vacation at her parents' house, she was expected to tackle a mountain of chores and the year-end cleaning, a role she'd played as the perfect daughter for years. Lately, though, the unequal expectations had begun to feel suffocating. Though she'd grown accustomed to this division of labor since her student days, she now craved time for herself, time for hobbies, friends, and simply to breathe. A flicker of hope stirred when she remembered her mom's promise of a special surprise. Maybe this year they'd finally appreciate her too. After loading the last of her luggage into the car, Margaret drove toward Willow Creek, watching the snowy landscape drift by, wishing that this Christmas might be different. On Christmas morning, the Watson living room glowed with the warmth of the fireplace and the aroma of pine, while outside gentle snowfall transformed the world into a perfect white wonderland. Though exhausted from hours of cleaning and cooking since arriving, Margaret's heart warmed at the festive scene. Everyone, breakfast is ready. Eleanor's cheerful voice rang out from the kitchen. Having just finished decorating the tree, Margaret headed over to find the table beautifully set with vibrant fruits, crispy bacon, eggs Benedict, and freshly baked croissants. Eleanor poured bright orange juice into glasses. Maggie, thank you. The table is just perfect, Eleanor exclaimed before glancing over at Lisa coming down the stairs. Lisa, that sweater is gorgeous. Did you design it yourself? Yeah, it's from my latest collection, Lisa replied proudly, tossing her long blonde hair as she sat down. Good morning, everyone. Merry Christmas, someone called out. Merry Christmas to our famous designer, another added. Walter glanced up from his newspaper with a smile. Your name was in the news this morning. One of the designers to watch this year. Margaret smiled quietly as she took her seat. Good morning, everyone. Merry Christmas. During breakfast, the conversation revolved around Lisa's recent triumphs, exhibitions in New York, collaborations with well-known celebrities, and interview requests from top fashion magazines. Margaret nodded along and even tried to share a few updates from the accounting firm, but the discussion inevitably circled back to Lisa. After breakfast, the family gathered in the living room around a large Christmas tree festooned with decorations, with colorfully wrapped presents scattered on the floor. "Now it's time for presents," Walter announced loudly, donning a Santa hat as he sat on the floor. "First for Lisa," he declared. Lisa squealed and clapped as she received a long envelope from her father. "What is it? What is it?" Margaret watched with a gentle smile as Lisa opened the envelope. Upon reading its contents, Lisa jumped up in disbelief. "No way, 2 weeks at the Ender Resort in Bali. And first-class tickets, too." She stared at the documents and then discovered high-value travel checks tucked inside. "I can't possibly use all this. You're the pride of our family," Eleanor said warmly, embracing her daughter. "I'm so thrilled that your talent and hard work are finally being recognized. We thought this gift was the perfect way to celebrate your success," Walter added proudly, puffing out his chest. Lisa hugged her parents and then turned to Margaret, exclaiming, "I can't believe it, such an extravagant present." Margaret nodded with a genuine smile, truly happy for her sister's achievements. "Now it's Maggie's turn," Walter announced as he pulled a medium-sized box from beneath the tree and handed it to her. "This is something we prepared especially for you." Her heart swelled with cautious expectation. Could this be the surprise her mother had promised? The box was elegantly wrapped with a fine ribbon. "Thank you," Margaret murmured as she untied the ribbon and carefully unfolded the wrapping paper. Inside, there was only a single sheet of paper bearing the words, "Household Chore List," assigned to Margaret. For a long moment, Margaret doubted her eyes as she read the lengthy list in small print. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. "Now you can be even more helpful," Walter said with a broad smile. "You've always been so organized. While Lisa is traveling, we're visiting friends in Florida. It's such a relief to know the house is in your capable hands." Lisa clapped her hands. "Maggie, thank you. I hope my room is spotless when I get back." In that instant, the room felt ice-cold. Slowly, Margaret lifted her eyes to meet the expectant stares of her family. They were serious. They truly believed this was her Christmas present. "Thank you. It's very practical," she said softly, trying to hide the tremor in her voice. She stood up. "I think I need some fresh air. I'll step outside for a bit." Margaret left the room with measured steps. Once alone in her upstairs room, she closed the door and tears began to stream down her face. Looking out at the snow piling up on the window, she took deep, shuddering breaths as years of suppressed feelings rushed in. Grabbing a suitcase from her closet, she packed quickly, throwing in essential clothes and personal items. Then she took out a notepad and wrote, "My family, thank you for the Christmas present. For too long, I've played the role of the perfect daughter and reliable sister. But today I choose to live for myself. I won't be in touch for a while. Please don't worry about me." Placing the note on her pillow, Margaret grabbed her suitcase and went downstairs, even as her family continued exchanging gifts, oblivious to her absence. Quietly, she slipped out the front door, loaded her luggage into the car, and drove along snow-covered roads. Overwhelmed by a mix of liberation and anxiety, she wasn't sure if she had made the right decision, only that she could no longer live the same way. As she left Willow Creek behind and watched the lights of her family home shrink in the rearview mirror, Margaret realized she had taken her first step toward a new life. Later, in a modest hotel room in downtown Philadelphia, Margaret sat by the window, gazing at the snowy cityscape for 3 hours. Seated on the bed, she pondered the meaning of her actions. For the first time in her life, she had abandoned plans, defied expectations, and chosen to follow her own heart. "So this is freedom," she murmured. Turning on her smartphone, she logged out of all her social media accounts one by one, and finally sent a brief vacation notice to her boss citing family circumstances. A truth she could live with. Her room was small but clean and free of anyone else's demands. With a deep sigh, Margaret retrieved a small bottle of wine from the minibar. As if celebrating her first impulsive step, she poured herself a glass of red. "To new beginnings," she toasted quietly. Later that night, she emailed her longtime friend Sarah with a simple message. "I might be out of touch for a while. I need some time to reassess my life. Don't worry about me." Meanwhile, as Christmas night deepened, anxiety began to grip the Watson household. I checked Maggie's room, Eleanor said. Returning to the living room with a troubled look, she handed Walter the note found on Margaret's pillow along with her empty luggage. Walter read the note and frowned. What is she thinking? This has gone too far. Lisa took the note from her father, her voice small and trembling. Maggie, I can't believe she would do this. I'll call her right away, Eleanor declared, pulling out her smartphone, but every call went straight to voicemail. She's probably just taking a walk around, Lisa offered hesitantly, glancing out at the raging blizzard. She'll come back eventually, she added, though uncertainty lingered in her tone. The day after Christmas passed with no sign of Margaret. By the third morning in her Philadelphia hotel, her smartphone buzzed nonstop with calls and messages from her frantic parents. Taking a deep breath, Margaret gathered the courage to open the messages on her phone. At first, they were simple expressions of concern. Maggie, where are you? We're worried. Please get in touch. But soon the tone shifted. The messages became more critical. You're a grown adult now. Stop this unreasonable behavior and contact us immediately. Soon after, practical questions started piling up. Maggie, the garage door won't move. How do I fix it? Who's going to manage the house? And who will clean Lisa's room? Margaret let out a soft, ironic laugh. It wasn't concern they were showing. It was a laundry list of chores, revealing exactly how little her well-being mattered to them. She didn't reply. Instead, she switched her phone to silent mode, extended her hotel stay for another week, and headed to a nearby cafe. There, she savored the rare luxury of uninterrupted time while sipping a warm cafe latte. Back at the Watson home, confusion deepened. Lisa left for her luxurious Bali trip as scheduled. Before boarding, she hesitated for a moment, but when her mother said, "It's a special gift and Maggie would want you to go," Lisa's smile returned. "Don't worry about Maggie," Eleanor reassured her while driving her to the airport. "She's always been responsible. She'll come back eventually." But once Lisa was gone, chaos slowly took over the house. Walter and Eleanor struggled with even the simplest household tasks. In their generation, housework was seen as women's work, and despite her years as a teacher, Eleanor had always relied on Margaret to keep everything in order. Laundry piled up, dishes sat unwashed, and garbage bins overflowed. To make matters worse, they were clueless about managing the bills that Margaret usually handled. "This won't do," Eleanor fretted. "Should we cancel our Florida trip?" "Don't be ridiculous," Walter objected. "We promised our friends, we can't just cancel our annual gathering." "But what about the house and the New Year's party?" Eleanor asked. The big annual party at the Watson home had already been set in motion. Invitations sent, relatives from afar booking flights, and Margaret always in charge of the preparations. "Oh no," Walter muttered. "Without Maggie, we can't have the party." Just then the phone rang. When Eleanor answered, Lisa's excited voice came through. "Mom, Bali is amazing. The beaches are fantastic, and the hotel staff is so kind." Yet even as she listened, Eleanor's mind raced with worry about the party. "Lisa, have you heard from Maggie?" "No, I haven't." "Isn't she back yet?" Lisa's voice dipped a bit. "I'm really worried about the New Year's party," Eleanor admitted. Lisa replied in a softer tone, "It'll be tough without Maggie." After hanging up, Eleanor and Walter tried calling Margaret's cell phone again. This time it rang briefly before disconnecting, a sign that her phone was on. "I'll try sending another message," Eleanor said, typing. "Maggie, please get in touch. It's important." Still there was no reply. With just 3 days left until the new year and relatives arriving soon, anxiety in the Watson home reached its peak. The house was a mess, and no one had begun preparations. "We can't wait any longer," Walter decided. "We need to find Maggie." They called Margaret's workplace only to learn she was on vacation, and reached out to her friend Sarah, who advised them to respect her wishes. "I'll try calling her directly one more time," Eleanor declared. This time the phone rang and suddenly Margaret's voice answered. "Hello?" came her soft reply. "Maggie," Eleanor shouted. "Where are you? Please come back." Margaret paused, gazing out the window as if listening to an inner voice. "It's about the party, isn't it?" she said calmly. "Yes, but it's more than that," Eleanor insisted, her voice thick with urgency. We're worried about the house, and about you too. Really? Margaret asked. When you disappeared. Our first concern wasn't you, it was the housework, Eleanor said, the silence on the line heavy before Walter added, Maggie, please come home. Nothing works without you. Margaret closed her eyes as conflicting emotions churned within her. Torn between the urge to help her family and her newfound determination to value herself, she finally said, Let me think about it. I'll give you an answer tomorrow. After hanging up, she lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling and wondering what she should do. For the first time, she truly savored the freedom to choose for herself. The next morning in Philadelphia was quiet. Sitting by the hotel window with a warm coffee, Margaret gazed out at the cityscape. Over the past few days, she had taken time to reflect on a life spent always trying to be the good daughter, always putting others' needs above her own. She realized that for 38 years, she had lost sight of herself by always trying to meet everyone else's expectations. Opening her notebook, she reread the thoughts she jotted down. The life she wanted, the values she cherished, and most importantly, how to respect herself. This was a revelation. Just the day before, she'd had a long conversation with Sarah Fisher, a psychological counselor she'd met by chance at a cafe near the hotel. Sarah had listened intently, offering warm support and sharp questions. Setting boundaries is one way to cherish yourself, Sarah had said. Sometimes saying no is the bravest act of self-affirmation. Those words resonated deeply with Margaret, and she made a decision. She would return home, but on her own terms. Sitting at her laptop, Margaret began composing a letter to her parents. Dear Mom and Dad, for a long time, I found joy in serving our family. However, the Christmas incident showed me how little I am truly valued. I will return home and help with the New Year's party, but I need you to understand the following. I am not your maid. I deserve to be treated as an equal daughter, and household chores should be shared by everyone. My time and effort have worth, and I expect that to be respected. My life choices and successes should be celebrated just as much as Lisa's. If you cannot accept these conditions, I will not return and will follow my own path. I await your response with love. After sending the email, Margaret took a deep breath. It was the first step toward her new self. The reply came quickly. Maggie, of course, please come back immediately. We accept your conditions. The house just isn't the same without you. Love, Mom and Dad. Margaret smiled at the brief, urgent response. They still didn't fully grasp the change, but it was only the beginning. She began packing her belongings to check out. Standing at the doorway of her family home, Margaret felt a strange mix of familiarity and transformation. The door looked the same as when she had left just a few days ago, but she was not the same person. Taking a deep breath, she turned the knob. Inside, the living room matched her worst expectations. Scattered newspapers, unwashed dishes piled on the coffee table, fallen decorations, a darkened Christmas tree with brown, drooping pine needles. Maggie! Eleanor rushed out of the kitchen, trying to embrace her daughter, but Margaret stepped back and met her parents' eyes. Mom, Dad, we need to talk. Their surprised glances betrayed their shock. This was not the compliant Margaret they had always known. They all sat at the dining table as Margaret began calmly. The conditions I outlined in my email aren't just points for negotiation. They are the new boundaries in my life. For 38 years, I have always been the reliable child, meeting family expectations while my own life, wishes, and achievements came second. She paused before continuing. The Christmas gift was symbolic. Lisa got a luxurious trip while I received a chore list with useful attached to it. That message hurt, because it told me that my worth is measured by how useful I am. Eleanor and Walter exchanged confused looks. We never meant it that way, Eleanor murmured. Intentions aside, what matters is how I feel, and what we do moving forward, Margaret said firmly. Walter asked, So what do you want? For the first time I want equality, she answered simply. Let's create a chore distribution chart. Let's all pitch in for the New Year's party when our relatives come. And most importantly, I expect my life choices to be respected, just as Lisa's are. Walter hesitated, then sighed heavily. What you're saying makes sense. Eleanor nodded gently. Maggie, maybe we took you for granted. I'm sorry. Margaret smiled softly. There's no need to apologize. What matters is how we move forward. That afternoon, the three of them gathered around the kitchen whiteboard. Under Margaret's guidance, they mapped out a chore distribution chart. Cleaning, cooking, shopping, yard work, bill payments. All tasks were divided fairly. When Lisa returns, we'll add her share too, Margaret added. Her parents hesitated for a moment, then agreed. Walter admitted sheepishly, I honestly don't know how to do some of these chores. It's okay, Dad. I'll teach you. Even if you're not perfect, there's value in trying, Margaret replied warmly. Eleanor, though surprised by her daughter's transformation, felt hope for a new kind of relationship. Maggie, you've always been strong, she said as she took Margaret's hand. We just never appreciated it enough. Preparing for the New Year's party turned into a fresh, shared experience for the Watson family. Instead of giving orders, Margaret worked side by side with her parents. Walter even attempted using a vacuum cleaner for the first time, and Eleanor challenged herself to cook party dishes under Margaret's guidance. It's actually pretty fun once you get started, Walter admitted after finishing the living room decorations. I don't know why I avoided it for so long. Old habits die hard. Eleanor sighed. In our generation, roles were set in stone, but that doesn't mean they can't change. What matters is that we respect each other and help one another, Margaret replied. The night before the party, Lisa's face appeared on a video call, her suntan smile beaming from Bali. Maggie, you're back, Lisa exclaimed. I'm coming back the day after tomorrow. Will I make it in time for the party? Margaret asked. You will, Lisa promised, then added. But when you get back, we need to talk. Is something wrong? Lisa frowned. No, not a problem, just a change for the better, Margaret said gently. After the call, Margaret returned to her room, the first time since leaving on Christmas. Though she would sleep there again, neither the room nor she herself was the same. Looking up at the night sky through the window, Margaret smiled slightly. It wasn't a complete solution. Years of unhealthy relationships wouldn't vanish overnight. But it was a start, a hopeful step toward a future where her value was defined on her own terms. That one confrontation wasn't a magic fix, but it sparked the first real change, and more importantly, Margaret herself had transformed. Knowing your worth is the beginning of everything, she murmured. Pulling out her diary, she began recording the day's events and emotions, as if marking the start of a new chapter. On an April afternoon with soft spring sunlight warming Willow Creek, Margaret was in her apartment kitchen preparing dinner. For months had passed since Christmas, and her life had shifted in meaningful ways. She continued working at the accounting firm, but now she also attended watercolor classes once a week, pursuing a hobby she'd long admired. The biggest change of all was renting her own apartment, just a 20-minute walk from her parents' home. This way, she could stay close enough to maintain family ties while having a personal space to call her own. Sunday evening dinners had become a new family tradition, and tonight it was her turn to host. The doorbell rang, and when Margaret opened the door, her parents and Lisa stood there. Something smells good, Eleanor beamed, handing Margaret a bouquet of the first tulips from the garden. Thank you, Mom, Margaret said, accepting the flowers and inviting everyone in. Walter came with a bottle of wine, and Lisa carried a dessert box, each contributing to the new tradition. How was your watercolor class this week? Lisa asked. Since returning from Bali, her attitude had softened. Though she had initially resisted the family's new way of doing things, Margaret's firmness and their parents' consistent stance had helped her adjust. It was wonderful, Margaret replied, gesturing to a small landscape painting hanging on the living room wall. This is my latest work. You've got real talent, Walter said, pleasantly surprised. Why didn't you start sooner? A brief silence followed before Eleanor gently nudged her husband. That's something we should think about, too. Throughout the meal, conversation flowed naturally. Lisa talked about her latest fashion show, Walter shared updates on his golf outings with his retirement group, and Eleanor excitedly recounted local volunteer activities. Margaret discussed the possibility of a promotion at work. When it was time to toast, Eleanor raised her glass and declared, "To our new beginnings." After dinner, Lisa invited Margaret to the balcony. Standing side by side under a twilight sky, Lisa finally said, "I want to apologize. For years, I took special treatment for granted and never considered how you felt." Turning to her sister, Margaret met sincere eyes. "It's not your fault," she replied softly. "We built this together. And what matters now is how we move forward." "Will you come to my show in New York next month?" Lisa asked, hopeful. "I'll even arrange special seats and an after-party invite," she added. Margaret smiled warmly. "Of course I'll be there. I'm really looking forward to it." In the living room, Walter and Eleanor talked quietly. They both agreed that the monthly family counseling sessions Margaret had suggested were helping them face years of unhealthy roles and habits. Though sometimes painful, those sessions were slowly strengthening their bond. When the sisters returned to the living room, Eleanor pulled out a calendar. "Let's decide on our next big cleaning day," she said. Lisa sighed softly, then nodded. "Thursday next week works for me." Margaret smiled quietly. They weren't a perfect family. Old habits still crept in sometimes, but what mattered was that everyone was making an effort. As they prepared to leave, Eleanor hugged Margaret tightly. "Thank you for your courage," she whispered. "You saved our family." In that moment, Margaret felt the balance in her life being restored. Her relationship with her family, her work, and most importantly, the time and space for herself. Her decision on Christmas had set not only her own life but the entire family on a new path. Back in her apartment, Margaret gazed out the window at the tulips her mother had given her. Arranged by the window like bright heralds of spring, they reminded her that her life too was beginning to bloom. A new season had just begun.